Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Todd Kimbrell. I'm the Accenture North American Cloud Lead for Public Sector. And we're here to give you a little teaser for the joint NASCIO Accenture Cloud Survey. The preliminary findings, this webinar is about a conversation with a few of the CIOs that responded to the survey that you all received earlier this year. And we thought we'd go ahead and give you a rundown of the program. What does it look like? What's coming? What you can expect to see coming out of the results when we produce the final at the annual conference in October, which hopefully we will all be in Seattle to do face-to-face, but we'll see. But that certainly is the hope and expectation. We're very fortunate today, 3 of the state CIOs that are able to join us. J.R. Sloan, who is our Arizona CIO, Greg Zickow, our Idaho CIO, and Trina Zanow, our Wisconsin CIO. And we structured this panel because these 3 CIOs in these 3 states are coming at cloud from slightly different perspectives. And we really wanted to make sure that as we talked about this survey and this project, the program, that people that have not necessarily made a commitment to the cloud, those that have made a serious commitment to the cloud, and those that are somewhere in the middle, that those points of view are all represented. And I think we've done that with this panel. So I do want to thank them. I'll introduce them. Trina first. I'll let you say a few notes about Wisconsin and where you're at in your journey to the cloud.
So hello, everybody. I am Trina Zanow, as Todd introduced. Glad to be here today and talk about our journey to the cloud. As we were prepping for this chat with you all today, I think, part of what we're doing in Wisconsin is really taking a cloud appropriate approach. It's kind of reviewing the business needs and understanding kind of the data and integrations that go with that and figuring out the solution that makes sense. So I think it's great that you have a panel today that has a diverse kind of perspective on clouds. And you'll get to see kind of our different approaches on benefits and efficiencies and agility and costs and some of the things that we're looking at and really what feed the value propositions for our customers. As I said, integrations really are something that I think are often overlooked in some of the design sessions for cloud. And so we're really taking an effort to kind of have these conversations with our business customers before jumping in to what we would say the cloud pool of activities. We are definitely working on our policies, our procedures, our workflows, and we have what we call a brokerage framework process to really cover all of the pieces that we want covered when somebody is going to the cloud. The brokerage process also takes into account our cybersecurity challenges and concerns and makes sure that as things are going, we understand the alignment and how that fits with what we expect when something is on-prem. So we're always kind of keeping an eye out for StateRAMP and FedRAMP and how our processes and procedures are going to ultimately link up to them. And so our hope is that as we're developing these procedures, it'll be an easy transition then as we get our customers and our agencies aligned. I do know that some of the questions and things potentially they're going to come up is how do you control and manage the cloud space, right? And I think one of the biggest things that we are hoping to achieve is a minimal number of infrastructure as a service providers that, we kind of keep that tight to the vest of a small number, and we're really seeing kind of a large sprawl in the software as a service space. So we're hoping that as we pull together some catalogs and some activities on our own end, that maybe we'll be able to jumpstart and feed some of the go this route because you already have a partner that has done that, or we can take advantage of economies of scale as another agency has seen that we're already in a space. So again, looking forward to the conversation today. I don't want to consume the entire time, and I'll let Todd introduce the other 2.
Yeah, so you used the word sprawl, which is really interesting. I think, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago or 2 years ago, I don't know that people would have necessarily used that word to describe sort of cloud adoption, but for sure, I think that was one of the elements that we were surprised about in terms of the survey responses. But next, so ladies went first. Now we'll go alphabetically based on last name. So J.R. Sloan from the state of Arizona, you are up next.
All right. Well, so I guess I probably will represent the folks that are further down the path, and you know, maybe we all in maybe describes us, you know, a bit more. I really appreciate Trina your opening comments, because I think there's a lot of the same things that you know, we both have identified and are continuing to identify and continuing to mature. And I think that also that's speaking a bit ahead into the survey, that's one of the things I really saw the value in, is being able to start to build a maturity model around cloud adoption and so forth. And you know, for Arizona, we started you know, our journey, I'll say, back as early as 2013, 2014. But it really got some momentum and more formalized in 2017, 2018, when we started to introduce a cloud first policy. We had some drivers for us at that point, which was, you know, the state's largest data center for which we were responsible was on the cusp of, you know, needing significant investments. And even with those significant investments, it would still not meet some of the basic requirements that we could get by exiting and you know, both adopting the cloud and establishing a shared co-location at a tier 1 data center, you know, here in the Phoenix area. So we did kind of a dual investment, and our policy really said, hey, we really want to look for the opportunity to move things to the cloud anywhere we can. But we had a presence in that co-location facility for things that either weren't ready, weren't capable, or should not, you know, could not go, or the economics just weren't there. And I think what we've really been doing over the past few years is, you know, driving that on a you know, strategic plan basis. Agencies have been adopting. We have, I'll say, disposition, which means closed and or we understand why, if anything remains, what it is. 82 data centers, and I'll put quotes around that, because data center for us meant everything from, you know, what you might envision as a formal data center, to people who had shoved things into the IDFs throughout their buildings, to the thing that was shoved under the desk, to somebody's you know, laptop that was set up as a file server. So we've sought to, you know, get our arms around all those things, and frankly, in that process, you know, we keep discovering stuff. So this last year, like, we're multiple years into it, we still found, quote, 9 new things, new locations that needed to be handled, and so they're on our list for this year. But really, what we're trying to move towards is we've done a lot of the lift, and now we're really we're moving our focus into that maturity, adoption, optimization. How do we get you know, I think maybe the term that's more popular is, you know, smart. You use the word appropriate. I think those are you know, good terms to wrap around this, to articulate to folks the mindset of, you know, you don't just move and you're done, and you have to know why you're moving and what you're going to get from moving there.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So that concept of being there is not it. It's living there that is really the value of being in the cloud. Thanks, Jay. Our third panelist is Greg Zickow from the great state of Idaho. And Greg has a slightly different point of view based on the realities of his context. And I don't want to suggest that anyone is better or worse. It's just the reality of the world that we live in, right? So Greg, you share some thoughts about where you're at. You're on mute.
It's a different system. There we go.
There we go.
First time that's happened to me throughout the pandemic, which I would say is pretty awesome. So yeah, it's been a journey for us to get where we are today, and we still, you know, don't have a lot invested in cloud, in external cloud. You know, we had early on, when cloud was the latest silver bullet that everybody needed to adopt, we were pretty hot to get contracts in place. That was a more difficult process than we anticipated, and actually took us several years to get contracts in place. I'm still not really enthusiastic about the contracts that we have. But we heard the term, I think the first time I heard the term Cloud Smart was from Stephanie Dedman, one of our peer CIOs. And I thought it made a lot of sense to me. For our culture, for Idaho, the Cloud First that was adopted by many folks early on, it just wasn't the right fit. Our culture is one that's a little more risk averse, maybe not not early adopter, generally speaking, on technologies, although we have pockets of that. Right now, and we'll probably get a chance to talk about this, we see some pretty large risks in the cloud, but we're not necessarily opposed to the technology. We want to be smart about it, and that implies that we need to learn more about it. And so we need to do some proofs of concepts and some pilots in order to do that. We are actually building an internal cloud right now based on a particular technology, but that'd be Idaho, an Idaho hosted cloud, but it would be true cloud technology, and with an eye to being able to export some of the workloads that we would operate on that into one of the commercial clouds as appropriate, and migrate them back. So we're hoping to be able to do that. We actually did our first migration night before last. A couple of small workloads onto our internal cloud from a standard server storage platform. Went pretty well, so that's good. But we are at this late date, kind of just dipping our toes in that water, so to speak. So that's kind of where we are. And yeah, I like the Cloud Smart. I'm not sure who came up with that first, but I think it's a good perspective.
Yep. So we've heard Cloud Smart, Cloud Appropriate, and Cloud Careful. All right. Well, so again, thank you guys very much for being on the panel today and sharing your perspectives and thoughts. So I'm going to turn to the actual survey and the program that we put together. For all the CIOs out there in your organizations that participated, we did receive completed surveys from 35 of the states. So we greatly appreciate that level of participation. This program was themed on a 2-year cycle. So this is the first time we've done it. We expect to produce a baseline of what does cloud adoption look like today, and we'll repeat this every 2 years. So as not to overwhelm people, but then also to make sure that on a 2-year cycle, we felt that would really give a good indication of not only how cloud adoption by state organizations is moving, but also how the market is maturing, and sort of a new snapshot of how is the market changing concurrently with how state organizations are changing their adoption and their philosophies about cloud. So we had 35 states participate. Thank you all that were able to do that. Part of this this program is really 3 things. The survey was the first thing. And what we didn't want to do was just get a survey, aggregate the results, give you a statistical readout of how everybody feels about the cloud. So we want it to be more effective, more like a tool. So we incorporated a maturity tool that we put together. It's a self-assessment maturity tool, and you will be given this tool to fill out. It's got 40 different cloud capabilities, from strategic to operations, and you use that. It's a spreadsheet, but you use that tool to self-assess where you are in a maturity scale of 1 to 5. And it includes descriptors of each one of those levels so that you can more easily tie yourself into determining what your maturity is. You are not, for a state that fills this out, you keep it yourself. You do not submit it to anybody. This is for your benefit. When we produce the report at the end of the year, we will include recommendations of, if you want to increase your maturity relative to cloud, here are the things that we're going to tie recommendations to those self-assessed maturity settings. So if you determine that your self-assessment is a 2 on a scale of 1 to 5, then we will have recommendations of things that are appropriate for you, for the maturity of your organization, that you could tackle as actionable objectives to increase your relative maturity. And then the last thing is this snapshot. The third part is a snapshot of the actual market and how the market is changing. One example that was already brought up is this concept of state ramp, right? So we've got FedRAMP that I think everybody is familiar with. Now JR is on the committee for standing up a state ramp. And then you've got 2 states I know of, Arizona and Texas, that have legislation that are now standing up a state-specific authorization program, so an ASRAMP and a TexRAMP. And so when you as an organization, when you look at the marketplace and how you can consider consuming cloud services, these are relevant elements of the market that you should understand, and understand how those influence what procurement decisions you're going to make, what partnering decisions you're going to make, and how you're going to strategically take best advantage. So again, this is the baseline. This is our first year. We're really excited and pleased to be able to do this, and we're looking forward to to getting the results out in your hands at the annual conference. So we're yes.
I was going to say, just real quick clarification. Arizona actually doesn't have legislation that required that. We stood up ASRAMP as part of our, as we were along our cloud journey, we recognized, right? We have to do proper vetting of these providers who are going to be holding state data. And so that's where we stood up our process around that, and we can talk later about why I think StateRAMP is a good thing and solve some of the challenges that we've seen having done our internal process for a few years. And I think that the legislation in Texas and the approach that they'll be taking there will probably also address those, and StateRAMP may be part of their overall strategy to fulfill.
Yeah, and I think the FedRAMP process is a lengthy one. For the vendor communities that are FedRAMP certified, it is a lengthy process. It's arduous to go through. It certainly has a cost in it that sort of ultimately gets passed back to the customer, right, at the end of the day. But I think there are opportunities from a StateRAMP perspective, also from an ASRAMP or a TexRAMP. The idea that there may be vendors in the community out there that are more boutique, that may have capabilities that are extremely relevant to a specific state context, and they may not be interested in going through that process or even capable of going through the FedRAMP process. So anyway, thank you for the clarification, but that's a great example of how the market is changing, and we want to bring that perspective to the report to really make it a tool that's valuable to the CIOs. So we're going to pivot a little bit. We're going to go to some of the topics and looking at the survey responses in general. And I haven't seen individual responses. There's a research group that compiles it all together, so nobody has seen your individual responses. But there were a couple of topics that came out as, that's a little bit odd. So we're not going to go back to slideware and the question and percentage of, but we're just going to talk about some of those topics. And the first one, which JR brought up, is really sort of that concept of legislation. We were kind of surprised to see that there's not a whole lot of legislative activity out there mandating cloud. So there's things like legislation that says you should consider cloud, and there's legislation that says cloud first, and there's legislation that says if you develop a new application, it must be cloud enabled, and then there are others that may have gone more aggressively and said you shall move to the cloud. I know in Arizona the governor was very intent on doing government at the pace of business, and so there was a hard drive there to actually make it happen fast. So I wonder, just an open conversation from a legislative perspective, how do you characterize your relationship with the legislative branch, and then are you guiding them in terms of legislation that may support your perspectives on moving to the cloud, or are they sort of behind you and pushing with without engaging with you conversationally? What are your all's thoughts about that?
I can go first. I can jump in on this one because it touches on something that I think is important to me. One, I think we have a pretty good relationship with our legislature. They've supported us in our IT modernization process, which involves a lot of consolidation, and that's been ongoing for the last few years, and it's a major initiative by our governor. So cloud comes up in that context pretty frequently. They haven't discussed the notion of mandating it or even requiring us to look at it, but the usage of the cloud and what it is does come up. And generally, one of the things I point out to them, and this might be why they don't push, because of the particular nature of our state, as far as I know, all major cloud providers have at one point or another deplatformed organizations or individuals for what appear on the outset to be political reasons. And I'm sure if you talk to those companies, they'd have different justifications and different perspective. I'm not diving into that, nor trying to say that's a wrong policy or a right policy, but I identify it as a risk for a state, in Idaho's case, which is pretty red, and we do promulgate policy at the state level, which might create controversy and might be deemed as problematic positions. So while we're interested in moving some workloads to the cloud, we won't do so in a way that's not recoverable. and that's why we're starting out with that internal cloud, so that we can guarantee, at least in the near term, either until we have better contracts or until the nature of some of those actions changes, that if we put a workload out there, we can also bring it back in-house without an issue.
I think that's one really relevant point, the idea of the portability of workloads in the cloud. While the technology is there, it's not necessarily as easy as one would hope it would be.
Yeah,
there's work to be done.
There is work to be done. Trina, so what are your
Yeah, I'd
thoughts
like to build upon what Greg was saying. We have a great relationship, I think, with the legislature too, right? We have a Democratic governor. We have a legislative body that's primarily Republican, right? So there are some controversies that happen, as you would expect. But when it comes to the appropriate use of state taxpayer dollars, I think everybody has the right concept in mind, right? And similar to what Greg had mentioned, we've done consolidated efforts for many years now. We've done mainframe consolidation, we've done distributed consolidation, and now as we're talking about IT services, we're really talking about how do we embed some cloud in those activities. And so recently we actually get an opportunity on a regular basis to review statutes. And just most recently, we were working with our legislative liaison to do just that, identify some changes in our statutes that might make it more aligned with kind of how services are done today. So we'll kind of await to see what happens with some of those suggestions, but really it comes down to the protection of the data, right? And making sure that we really understand where our data is, how we're protecting that data wherever it is, and then being able to get that data and move it if a particular solution isn't working for us. So again, as part of our oversight responsibilities in DOA and the division I'm in, we're working on those adjustments. We're addressing T's and C's and things in contracts to make sure that if something does go to the cloud, that we have, like you said, Todd, exit strategies and ways to get to, what is our commodity in all of this relationship, to make sure that we can do what we need to with our data. And I think we recently went through a performance audit as well. And, part of that was suggestions from our Legislative Audit Bureau to say, look at your cloud practices, make sure that you understand as a state of Wisconsin and our oversight responsibilities, what all agencies are doing, have some common practices and procedures and workflows, and make sure that you're sharing that information. So again, I think they're for cloud, right? But nobody is mandating it because they want the right business solution for what we need, right? So.
Well, I know in my former role, I always found it very advantageous to have a member of the House of Representatives and a senator, both of which I could go in and meet with their staff regularly and advise them on forms of good legislation or effective legislation, or help them fine tune the language to make sure they weren't creating something that was not intended. So I think a strong relationship there is really critical, especially in cloud, because they don't have a strong necessarily technical understanding of it. So one of the things that jumped out in the survey too is that not everybody has a common definition of cloud. So there was some differences of opinion that were a little bit startling, in that not all states define cloud the same way. So it's easy to broad brush cloud, but when everybody takes a different perspective on that, it can influence kind of where you end up positioning your technology, right? So any thoughts on that, JR?
I think making sure you make the effort to properly clarify that, right? So, in fact, I'll say, even recently, so we've, as we've gone through our processes, we've sought to, be very clear about, okay, what do we consider, the infrastructure, platform, and software service providers? How are they defined? Do we consider our shared hosted, co-location environment cloud? Yes, we do. But again, the conversations I have with folks is like, if the right thing to do now is to move your stuff there, that's fine. But don't assume that you're done once you move there, right? That you're going to continue to look at it. And the thing I'll add in, which I hear both Greg and Trina talking about, is, for Arizona, it's always, even though we had a cloud first policy, this wasn't cloud at any cost, right? I'll go back to, you mentioned, our governor, and he was, encouraging, driving, government at the speed of business. And so that was really, I'll say, a business value approach to how you adopt cloud and why you adopt cloud. And the things that were drivers for us were the state wasn't really good at maintaining data center facilities, and to make sure that we challenged ourselves on who's investing more in securing data center environments, the state or commercial providers. Key with the cloud is that how you configure it is very important, but that's also true for anything you have that is quote state owned, right? So let's not assume that we've properly configured and have all the right protections around our own environments. We have to those are things we have to be vigilant about, no matter where the data is. And so I agree with the comments that both Trina and Greg have offered on that front. I think you have to look at where are you as a state? Where's your infrastructure? What sort of investments do you have? What is their life cycle? And then when is the right time? And I think for Arizona, we were at a point that was at the right point in our overall life cycle. And I think also you have to factor in, how are you structured? How are the investment strategies, and what levels, is it centralized? Are you decentralized? And what are the best ways to influence, where I think at the end of the day, we want to bring agility, scalability, elasticity, resiliency, and business value in the solutions that are coming forward, to be good stewards of the tax dollars and good stewards of protecting the data that we have.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, and it sort of leads me to get to the question of usage-based billing, which was indicated as the most common form from a financial perspective, and that fiduciary responsibility that people have. I've heard that there can be a reluctance to go to embrace the very power of cloud services in that elasticity and that scalability, because when you're scaling out and consuming resources, the meter is running, right? So from a budget perspective, you have a fixed budget, but the ability to control your consumption of resources is to stay below that number, but at least you have the ability to do that and move everything to that OpEx model instead of the CapEx model. Do y'all struggle with that at all, that element of cloud services, or do you feel like that's actually something you have a good control on?
I'll jump in too. We have another problem besides just that, Todd. Our secondary problem is, as part of our organization, we have an expenditure authority cap. So we have a limit on what our agency can spend on behalf of our own activities, plus things at an enterprise level. And so our challenge has been working with cloud providers in how do we delegate billing to the respective direct bill to our customers, instead of having it coming through a central source. That is a challenge for us from an expenditure authority perspective. And you're 100% correct. When agencies are used to a rate, right, when they come to us for our services, it's something they can budget for. Generally it doesn't go up a lot, up or down one way or the other, just because of they have a use case. They know how it's been, it's something that's kind of been trended over a period of time, and they know what to expect with our services. But as you start to look at some of the cloud services and just adoption of things like Microsoft's Power Platform, we're seeing huge adoptions with those types of things. And if you aren't careful about licensing, you can get yourself in trouble. If you're not worried about, if you don't pay attention to some of the capacities or some of the features that are being used, you could wind up in situations where you didn't budget for something, or you're using something and you're licensed for something, right? So there's a bunch of things from a compliance perspective that you really have to be paying attention to when you go into the cloud space.
Exactly.
I'll say some of the key things that we navigated with our contracts as well. So Trina, those very things, like, absolutely saw those issues. And I'll say I'm sort of happy to say that we learned some of the lessons that are probably, I don't know what can you use urban legend if you're in government, maybe, in terms of, the resources and the meter running, right? We did that on a small scale. And so, like, we tripped and made small mistakes at the beginning, and learned some of the lessons that we needed to move forward. And the contracts that we put in place allow, and this is using really structures that we found, well, put it this way, naming names, but to say that this is possible, at least I found it possible with all of the 3 major cloud providers. And I think you may find it, with others as well. So we started with AWS, and, they have what they call their organizational structures, right? Where you can have sort of a master billing account and sub accounts underneath that. And one of the things that I needed to be able to do is to be able to say, look, I'm not going to be the central payer for everybody. I need to enable each agency to take responsibility for their own stuff, which creates accountability in the process, right? And have the right contract vehicle in place that would support that. And so we were able to navigate to that. And while I can see statewide spend, I don't have visibility or control into the specifics of environments that I shouldn't. But we can aggregate our spend to drive things like discount programs and investments and that type of thing. Using that as a framework, being able to work with Microsoft, they have similar offerings that can go down that path. Google, as well, where we're able to say, look, this is the model. This is how we know this works well, and this gives my agencies their control and flexibility and ability to consume, but be accountable for what they consume. And then the governance, which is absolutely key, is we put a kind of a center of excellence in place around setting up we have a cloud steering committee as well as a cloud advisory committee, where we're really getting together, sharing best practices, sharing who's having success, how are you doing this, how can we do set up standard work that we do things similarly. And I think those things are all key to really being able to bring adoption and velocity, but also with confidence, right? And reducing the risk.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think having those governance structures in place is critical to managing the process and ensuring that you obtain the outcome that you really expect and that your customers expect. Greg, you were about to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Todd. So moving to a consumption model is important to us. Right now, a couple of different things. We have something that Trina would probably really appreciate being able to have. We have a continuous appropriation that doesn't have a cap on it. Now, fiscal policy, we've set fiscal policy to say there must be an appropriation somewhere. It might be in an agency, so they transfer money to us. And so that way we've attached a string to it to provide the state some protection. But because most of our costs are allocated out to agencies based on an algorithm, that it's under the statewide cost allocation program, the agencies don't generally have a business input on that, right? And I want to give them a stronger business input to make a business decision. Hey, if you want your bill to go down, consume less of this, or your bill is so large because you consume so much of that.
That's right.
And allow them to make those decisions instead of it just being, hey, here's this whole pie, we're going to allocate it out, and it's kind of first come first serve, or appears to be all you can eat buffet to them. So we're in the process of changing our model, and our internal and then future probable hybrid cloud is going to be a big part of that. But we are looking at governance right now and how we're going to do that, because that is spot on. It's going to be needed.
Yep, exactly.
If I can add one more thing on there that we did, we leveraged. We were able to leverage by aggregating our volume. We've been able to negotiate discounts with our cloud providers. We carve a little piece of that off, and we use that to invest in tools that help our agencies understand their spend. In this case, we're using a tool called Cloud Health. That provides them both, visibility on the security of their environment, their spend, where their resources are. So again, we use that, and we use that again as a common tool that everyone has access to across because it's a multi-cloud capable tool set, which again puts them back in control. And I think that's a great point, Greg, is that the agencies need to both have control of their environments, but also get the benefit. Like if they get better at it, they get the savings. And that's where I'll say a good example of is we've trying to travel this CIO's broker journey. We are brokering this, so this is not revenue to DOA in any way, shape, or form for my division. We've sought to put the contracts in place, negotiate those benefits. We put the majority of the cost savings in terms of discounts back in the pockets of the agencies, but we do carve off a little bit to help provide the tooling from a shared perspective for them.
Yeah, spot on, JR.
Yep. Well, we're going to shift to something a little more technical. We had one of the technical questions in the survey really focused on this concept of sort of hard-coded IP versus use in domain name services, and sort of the aspect of some of the complexities in the logical layer of what do you have to do to really rebuild your apps to enable them for the cloud. So 74% of the respondents, said they're not really using DNS. That's a big change to be able to more effectively operate your apps in the cloud. And we also had a question, so I guess just a technical discussion, but there was also a question from the audience that was pretty technical, and it's about sort of extending your network schemas into the cloud with regard to IP addressing and VLANs and firewalls and raw device mappings. And so, particularly where you've had to go through that exercise of creating that virtual data center to interconnect your compute on-prem with your landing zones in the cloud, what were some of the complexities and how did you overcome those complexities within your teams? And Greg, I think your comment would be sort of how did you make that work in a private cloud environment versus a more hybrid cloud that I think Wisconsin and Arizona have. But any specific challenges rise to the forefront from an architectural perspective?
Yeah, I mean, for us,
hard.
it's hard, very technical. I can get way over my head and embarrass myself very easily here, but our new applications that we write, and as we rewrite the legacy applications, we're writing them to DNS to allow that. We have still, hundreds of IP coded, hard IP addressed applications that causes a great deal of difficulty as we have absorbed agencies through this consolidation and modernization process. So after that, I mean, we are on our internal side, a lot of the network components on the internal cloud are dynamic and smart and virtual. They're not hardware based as much, but we haven't even looked at how we're going to extend that into the hybrid yet. So
that's some of the complexities for sure.
Yeah, I think, Todd, too, from Wisconsin's perspective, right, when we talk about DNS, a lot of we have DNS in our environment, right? Clearly, it's been something that's been out there for a long time from a technology perspective. And what we're really finding is even some of the applications that they think are DNS aware end up tying themselves to a particular IP address. And so when something goes away from a network perspective, they're trying to figure out what happened with their application. So I would say we haven't mastered the challenge. There are still plenty of applications that are DNS aware and certainly are, functioning in such a way that if a piece of their VIP or, components disappear on them, they can quickly recover, and it does that automatically. But there are others certainly in our environment that are, like I said, tie themselves to a particular IP address, even though they're using DNS and on the back end, right? And so then they're having to recycle services or other things. I think from a network perspective, whether you're on-prem in a cloud or external in a cloud, segmentation and understanding how all of that works and making sure that you understand the traversing of data between networks and your firewalls and all of those things are technical challenges that you're going to have to deal with. It's something that I know our network team they're phenomenal at it. Obviously, we have some really good experts and engineers in our space that can traverse some of these items, but it is something that you have to pay attention to and not put everybody all in one space, because they do need segmentation even though they're in a central location. So it's something to be paying attention to.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something to just whiteboard in 10 minutes and then say, go make it.
Yeah, I know.
It's a lot more complex that you really have to think through that thought. So one of the things, going to network segmentation, some of the questions on the survey focused on cybersecurity and is the cloud secure and whatnot. And generally, it appeared that most people felt like they had the right cyber skills in their workforce and on their team, but there was a general reluctance and maybe not reluctance, but not a whole lot of confidence in the overall security of the cloud environments. Is there a perspective there where you're the CISO and the CISO's team is being too conservative with regard to your sort of appetite for adopting cloud, or is it right balanced? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll jump in first. Cybersecurity is not a cloud-specific thing, just FYI. We're worried about security no matter where we have
That's
our
right.
data, right?
Exactly.
And so,
Exactly.
you know, I think some of the new things that are coming into play with some of the third-party issues and some of the challenges that we've seen nationally, right, just raise extra concern from a culture perspective of how fast do you want to jump into something that's external that you really don't know. Where is your data? You know, how many data centers are they really connected to when you don't have kind of hands-on purview of some of those things? So I think just naturally, because it's out of your hands, there's a more reluctancy to, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes if you don't ask the questions, you're not told, right? So again, I think making sure that you do data classification, making sure that you know, you talk about the integrations and where things are going and how things are traversing, you talk about encryption and you talk about the exit strategy, right? All of those go into kind of evaluating the solution overall. And again, I don't think no matter where it's sitting, security is always going to be something that we're talking about, and supply chain issues for that matter too, right? Knowing as part of some of our T's and C's, even now, we're talking about not only our own supply chains, but as you're working with a vendor, understanding what their supply chains are and what they're doing to make sure that if something does go bump in the night, how are they going to be able to get the equipment and things to fix whatever they need to make sure your service stays stable. So again, I think there's lots of things that are evolving in the cybersecurity space that just raise, you know, for us to be aware of what those are. And it's a new thing that we're talking to vendors about that we haven't talked to them about before. You know, typically, you know, when you think of external cloud, you're turning over those reins and you're saying, okay, you got it, right? And yeah, we have to put peripheral things around to make sure we understand logging and, you know, understand how our applications are functioning. And that's really our responsibility. But, you know, there is now this back and forth that we need to have with vendors to talk about the cybersecurity challenges in general and how are we working together on those items.
Yeah, I think, you know, historically, if you look at how cloud has come around, there's that sort of, you know, traditional from 10 years ago, that view of SaaS and PaaS and IaaS. And I think when you look at the underlying contracting vehicles for those three different service delivery models, they're a lot more standard now than they used to be. They've gotten to a much, much better place. SaaS is very clear who's responsible for what. Infrastructure as a service, I think, has gotten to a good standard where it's also very evident who's responsible for what. But when it's shared responsibility, that can be a little more complex, just to make sure that you know, the customer and the provider are really, you know, linked up tightly on where that sharing line exists. So that's a key thing. One of the things too in the marketplace that it strikes me as being an interesting evolution is the blurring, particularly when you get to the Magic 3, right? I mean, the blurring of what used to be purely infrastructure as a service is really no longer infrastructure as a service. You can now go to one of those top three providers and you can get SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, whatever, and it's all sort of bundled as one single provider. So historically, where, you know, Trina, you mentioned sprawl, particularly with SaaS, the evolution of these cloud service providers and the capabilities that they're making available today, you almost could just pick one provider and you can get everything you need from that one provider. Almost, not quite, not quite. But that market is changing. What about the rest of the workforce? You know, do you feel like you have the right skills in the workforce, or thinking about retraining skills, right? So as you move more to that cloud service delivery, JR, you probably have more experience with this than the others, but as you make that movement, there are some more technical skills that maybe you don't quite need as much of anymore, and it's an opportunity to reskill them into more value-added roles, right? That better enable the mission. Any thoughts on workforce impact? And how does that factor into your strategy?
Yeah, so two things that we navigated, I'll say specifically with my own organization, and then we became, you know, we kind of sought to share this then with our other agencies as they embarked on their own individual journeys. You know, two key things. One was, okay, you know, we were trying to lead in adopting the cloud and so forth. And so we had to then walk that process of, you know, saying, okay, well, what do our you know, server administrators and data center personnel, what are they currently doing, and how's that going to change? And as we moved more and more to the cloud, then we were very purposeful in saying to them, you may be a server administrator today, you're going to be a cloud administrator tomorrow. Here's how those things map over. And we started doing lots of investment in training, which I will say the cloud partners I found are awesome in bringing forward those resources and making those available. They continue to do so. So definitely watch for that, take advantage of it, make that part of your discussion with them. But it's a career path, and the way we positioned it with our folks is like, you are actually moving towards the skills that are most prevalent in the market. This increases your value, and I'll say suffered, but like some of those realities came to bear, which were we had people that went through, got that training, and found out that they had a much greater value elsewhere in the market, and made a career choice. But it also has allowed us to attract talent, right? So for folks where the style of working in government best matches what they want from a career perspective, we've been able to attract some great talent, and we've been able to, I'll say, had probably the majority of folks that we've invested in are staying, because they honestly, it's like they get their cake and eat it too. They liked working for government, and now they've got current skill sets that make them more marketable. That if they want a career change, they can move in that direction. Went through, and I'll say this also benefited us as we went through our mainframe move. We moved. The state had two large mainframe investments. One was owned by our Department of Administration. We worked through moving that with IBM into their zCloud environment, and that meant that DOA's responsibility of operating that environment was no longer going to be part of our business going forward. As part of that negotiation, and I'll say one of the challenges that we had, and everyone will resonate with this, is like, where do you find the talent when folks retire? They move on. Like, just staffing that was just a constant, personnel challenge for us, both on the application side as well as the operations side. So being able to effectively move that problem, so to speak, to a vendor partner was tremendously valuable. And in that process, we were able to negotiate that. Those employees that wanted to stay and continue to do that, well, we offered opportunities for those that wanted to stay in the organization. Look, you can retrain, reskill, and go over here. If you want to continue to do mainframe because that's what you love, our negotiations offered an opportunity for them to be rebadged as employees, and they moved on, and they're still serving the state, but on the other side now. And it was a win-win, and so that was that's something to look at and say can that be possible as part of your investigation there.
I think that's a really big area that a lot of states haven't really gone to yet. I know there's been some forward progress there, but that mainframe in particular is so challenging with regard to the first person in and the last person out in terms of the overall cost being shared and spread. And as multiple parties are sharing a mainframe environment and one moves off, it gets more expensive for everybody else. Common problem. Congratulations for solving it and making that a reality. That's big. I think a lot of states are going to be reaching out to you for that. Want to host some more? One of the other things that sort of came through in the survey was that justice and public safety were generally sort of had disciplines generally had the lowest sort of adoption rate of cloud services, and that not a real surprise there, right? I mean, both of them have a very I need to control it perspective, and not wanting to necessarily use COTS packages, develop it all internally, keep it all under close to the vest. But it poses a problem for you guys that in time, if you move more to the cloud, and then you've got some agencies like that just are like, I'm not moving, I'm doing it the way I've always done it. I'm doing waterfall, I'm building it myself, and I'm running it myself. How do you reconcile your service with customer agencies that are so locked in and rigid in the way they practice IT? Is there anything you can do?
I'll jump in because we probably navigated that more often for Arizona just because of what we're doing. And I'll say that while yes, broadly, Todd, I mean that does characterize kind of our public safety, and I'll say, but rightly so, right? They're tasked with compliance with the CJIS requirements and stewarding that data, and frankly, I'm glad to know that they really think carefully about that. I will say I've seen our public safety and justice departments, like, they are adopting cloud services. They're doing so in again, I think a smart, measured, appropriate way. They are looking at where there are, it's going to be in the GovCloud, genre of environments. And they're very, they're working carefully with their vendors, and they bring, those compliance and regulatory things, to the table in the process, and ensure that that's all going to be covered. But it has offered them some great opportunities to be more agile, solve some problems, and bring some scalability to the organization. So I think Arizona, I believe, going back to kind of the earlier discussions of, business objectives, business value, seeking to move faster, taking the right on-purpose approach for the business, and not, I'll say overall, like, don't be afraid of the cloud. It's how you do it. Just the cloud's no different than any other environment. Don't assume that you're doing everything smart just because it's it's a physical building you can look at and a server you can go touch. You've got to apply the same regulatory and compliance things, and I in partnership with the cloud providers, right? They will bring forward. You say, this is how I have to solve this problem. These are the parameters I need to work with. They've got people, it's not their first rodeo, and they'll bring the right people to the table and show you how you can get there. And then ultimately, it's a business decision.
Yep.
Yeah, I will just add to JR, right? It's not always easy, right? Knowing that you have some of these additional security challenges and hoops to work through, but it's not impossible. We've done it in our state. We've worked with various vendors to kind of help traverse and navigate and work with our partners, DNR, DOJ, and DOT, right? That all have kind of those types of positions in them, and our own Capitol Police, right? And I think as more digital evidence kind of has an influx in what we're seeing, there's going to be a need for different types of storage, and not all of that can be put online or on-prem in some of our services, right? So you're going to look to some of those cloud providers to help with those types of things. It's just a natural evolution, but I couldn't agree more, right, with JR. And it has to be cloud appropriate, it has to be cloud smart, right? You're looking at the business case and what the issues are to figure out what's the right solution. So
yeah, the one thing I would add is just a reminder, and I know everybody knows this, so sometimes I know I'm preaching to the choir, but FedRAMP's a great thing. Different levels of FedRAMP. FedRAMP means it can be compliant. It doesn't mean it is compliant. It's entirely possible for us to screw it up by the way we set it up. And we might not know it till the auditor comes through and asks us the question, and we go, oh,
that's right.
Yeah, we'll get on that.
Exactly.
that's true for our on-prem stuff too, Greg.
That's exactly.
True.
Yes, exactly right. Well, like you said earlier, it doesn't change. Yeah, and JR mentioned as well. It doesn't change. Whether you're in the cloud or in-house or on traditional server storage. Right. Yeah, it's our responsibility. I had a long philosophic argument with our division of purchasing head a couple of years ago on whether it was possible to offload your risk. I maintain that you cannot. He thought that you could by going to the cloud. I said, no, you're not. You might move it. You might give somebody else. You might be able to point to somebody else, but you're still accountable. If you have a bad contract, if you implement in a bad way, you're not offloading the risk.
That's right.
No, at the end of the day, Greg, to your point, if it's a bad day, right, and the media is fired up, you're not going to be able to go, oh, but I trusted this cloud provider. Right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We are the stewards of the state data, and it's going to be us and our security officers are going to be the ones that are answering questions. And so, yeah, you can seek to maybe share that risk in ways, but ultimately we are accountable, and that's as it should be.
Yeah,
exactly. As it.
Yep. Well, I don't know if we have any questions no more questions from the audience that popped in the chat, but if anybody in the audience has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll see if we can answer it. While we're soliciting for that, we've got maybe 2 minutes left. Let's go for a final thought, right? If in your context, and you've got cloud vendors coming at you, and you know, they're coming at you from a certain perspective. They want your business. They want you to move to their cloud environment. What's the one thing that you could share with the vendor community to say, here's the most effective way to engage within my context? Not coming in and overpowering, saying, you know, whatever it may be. Any thoughts in that regard that you would want to share with the vendor community that's perhaps listening in right now?
So
Don't do
a key
this.
enabler. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, don't do this, or
Oh.
here's the way I'd like you to approach it this way, but never do this.
Oh, so I'll say the key enabler, and I'll say overarching would be make it easy, right? Now the way that this goes to the kind of the hyperscale cloud providers that we work with, right? And this is by putting the relationships in place, we've created you know, sandbox environments where our agencies can engage. We can get the technical people together. We can prototype the environment. We can stand it up. We can test it, poke it, pen test it. You know, before someone is, you know, and we have credits that cover the cost of that. You know, so it's make it easy for our agencies to engage and try it and prove it out, and not have to prove it out in, like, what I don't want is, I don't want to prove it in production. I don't want to find out there that we got it right or wrong. I want to know ahead of time. And so, you know, it's that, and understand, and they need to understand that this is still, it's still very much an education process. You know, there's not a rubber stamp that says, you know, cloud is okay all the time, everywhere, no matter what. And so, you know, that would be my soundbite on that.
Yeah, my soundbite would be patient with us, right? You know, as Todd, I think, started at the very beginning, we're all learning. We're all trying to understand how this fits into what we do day in and day out, right? And making sure that you give us the patience and the latitude to figure some of these things out. And it's okay to come in and educate us. I've seen a couple of vendors really do a heavy sales job, which I get. But sometimes that creates animosity and other issues, right? And so again, I think just understand that we are all, as you've seen from this panel today, coming at it from different places, and just recognizing that and working with us to help us understand some of the benefits and the things that you can bring to the table. And I'm always going to point my vendors to our vendor management process, just FYI, because that's why we have it. So because we have to make sure that we're also working with our procurement and rules. So, but just like I said, I think the parting comment would be patient with us. So
Those are good comments. I would add, and this is an observation based on conversations with some of the major cloud providers. And I generally raise that issue, and I hate to have one bell and keep ringing it, but yeah, I raise the issue of the political risk as we see it. One response I have never had is this: we will never do that to you. So, which makes me want to look more closely at my contracts and protect my state from risk by being able to bring workloads back in-house. So.
That's an excellent point. Well, so there was, as we were doing that, there was one question that came in. So one word response from each of you, and then we'll wrap. You have a choice of either having a single cloud provider or multi-cloud providers in your strategy. Do you go for one or multi? Greg?
Multi.
AR?
Multi.
Trina? Trina?
multi.
There you go. 3-0. Multi is the way to go. So I will share one quick story. Back in 2010, we put together in Texas, we put together a pilot cloud with 4 infrastructure as service providers. We had 4 agencies participating, and we stood them up and automated self-provisioning. This was my first effort in the cloud. And I told everybody, now this cloud thing, when you stand up that resource, the meter is running, so the billing is going to start. So don't stand it up until you're ready to use it. Everybody understand? Yeah, we got it. Okay. First month, get a bill for $35,000. Go to that agency and go, here's your bill. They're like, wait a minute, what's that? Well, did you not turn that resource up? Well, yeah, we did, but we didn't use it for anything. So it's good to know that we have progressed from those days, but there's still more distance to cover. So anyway, thank you guys very much, Greg, JR, and Trina. Really appreciate your committing to do this and helping us out and sharing your experiences. So really, really appreciate it. So I think with that, we'll turn it back over to Julie, and Julie, do your magic to close us out, whatever that may be.